Good afternoon. We're here today to register our outrage at the irresponsible, dangerous, and shamelessly partisan spending cuts that will likely be approved in Congress this week. The compromise, so-called, that was agreed upon this Friday dramatically underscores the extent to which our nation is being held hostage by an extremist social and economic agenda carried out by the most right-wing of legislators. That extremist Republican agenda is precisely what brought us to the brink, to the edge of a government shutdown. The Republicans' proposed budget cuts for both fiscal years 2011 and 2012 are the most radical I've ever seen and represent an all-out war on the middle class, on low-income people, on seniors, on kids, on immigrants, on anyone who's sick, and on anyone who thinks that the country ought to remain competitive and maybe generate some jobs. The 2012 budget, proposed by Budget Committee Chairman Ryan on behalf of the Republicans, would essentially eliminate Medicare as we know it, would reduce Medicaid to a marginal discretionary program at the budgetary whims of governors and state agencies. The budget would slash aid for elementary and secondary education, would reduce money for Pell Grants for kids in college, would cut money for infrastructure, and on it goes. And the final compromise for the 2011 budget, which will cut more than $38 billion beyond the $40 billion already cut from the president's 2010 budget, will be an outright disaster for our communities. Under this lopsided and dangerous so-called compromise, we will, among other things, cut Head Start and child care for parents in need, cut support for seniors in nursing homes and health care for children and Americans with disabilities on Medicaid, cut job training and placement programs, just what we need in a recession when so many people are jobless, cut tenant assistance programs, cut the public housing capital fund so that our housing authorities cannot make repairs, cut community development block grants and community service block grants, which provide crucial funds for families, seniors, housing, and other vital services, cut food assistance to kids and families in need, and cut hundreds of other vital programs that New Yorkers and millions of Americans depend on. All this would be done while we would preserve subsidies to oil companies and special interests, protect tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans, and for companies that ship jobs overseas. After all, why should General Electric pay any taxes? And making the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy permanent. The Republicans' mythical obsession with balancing the budget and slashing spending is simply a mirage, which conceals a violent imposition of austerity measures on working families, seniors, children, the middle class, immigrants, and those who can least afford it, especially in a troubled economy. These aren't abstract or theoretical, quote, spending cuts, unquote. These are cuts that have real consequences on real people in all our communities. What's more, these cuts specifically punish urban centers like New York, where large concentrations of people rely on the services that community organizations and local governments provide. In a few minutes, you will hear from some of the local heroes who are fighting on the front lines of New York's neighborhoods, serving those thousands and thousands of New Yorkers who simply need a little bit of support in order to get by. And before I turn it over to some of the other people going to be speaking, I just want to emphasize that when you see the House vote this week, as we will, on Chairman Ryan's proposal, and you hear all the Republican talk of draconian budget cuts, remember, that proposal will cut about $4.3 trillion or $4.2 trillion in spending in order to support $4.3 trillion in tax cuts on the wealthy. It doesn't even reduce the deficit. It simply takes a lot of money from low-income people, from middle-income people, and hands it over in the form of lower income taxes to the biggest corporations, to the oil companies, and to the millionaires and billionaires. First, I'd like to turn it over to my longtime friend and the Dean of the New York Congressional Delegation, Congressman Charlie Rangel.
Thank you, Jerry. I want to thank my colleagues for coming together this morning, including members of the City Council, Councilman Jackson, Councilwoman Brewer, but more importantly, the people that are in our congressional districts and in the city of New York that provide services for the most feeble, the weakest, the poorest, the hopeless, the homeless, and they're the ones that are going to have to see the pain that is expected as a result of the agreement in extending the continuing resolution. I want you to know that the $38 billion cuts are merely a missile that's being sent to us as a wake-up call. This is an opportunity for America really to prove who we are and what we represent. It is not in America's best interest to ignore the fact that today we are involved in 3 undeclared wars. Thousands of Americans have been killed. More than that have been wounded. And millions are coming home in need of mental and physical care. Are they on our agenda? Are they really on our agenda? When people are talking about sacrifice and services to our veterans, it's on the list of sacrificing. Why can't we really take a look and find out what do the multi-billionaires earn in salary and what do they pay in taxes? If we're looking for sacrifice, why can't we take a look at the multinational corporations that refuse to invest in the United States and find out what are their profits? How many billions and trillions of dollars are they making? If we are really looking for sacrifice, why at a time when worldwide oil is going up to $112 a barrel, do we find ourselves subsidizing who? Oil producers in the United States of America. Now, there's something wrong with this picture, and I would suggest that from the Democratic leadership in the House of Representatives, coupled with a very close Senate race, and a president that has to really provide the leadership, not just for the United States, but provide the leadership for the entire world, that it's time that we heard from our spiritual leaders. It's time for Catholics and Protestants and Jews and Muslims to realize that everything that my colleagues will be talking to you about concern the things in the Quran and in the Torah, in the Old and New Testaments. And what are those things? The preservation of human life, not the killing, getting our youngsters killed. What are those things? Taking care of our children, our aged, and our sick. What are the stories about the Good Samaritan and making certain that we take care of the lesser among us? These are not Democratic and Republican principles. It's what our great nation has stood on. And the silence that we hear when we're talking about human life, education, job opportunity, are moral questions. And so we have a wake-up call now. The $38 billion is nothing compared to the nightmare that the Republicans are preparing in the House of Representatives. And we're dealing with people that have no concern about human feelings and the political system. So I beg of you to help me to scream out to say, we haven't had days like this since Franklin Roosevelt, but they've been after us ever since then in dismantling Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and they're saying it right out in the open. Thank you.